Hey everyone, today I wanted to make a video overviewing and giving some instruction on how to paint a motorcycle helmet. Now, disclaimer here, I have never painted a motorcycle helmet prior to this video, so I wanted to approach it from a complete beginner standpoint. I know there's a lot of videos out there giving instructions on how to do things and what to do, but I came across a lot of questions that I just didn't find answers to online. And so I figured, why not make a video and I can go in depth as to some of the problems and challenges I faced while trying to do this, give some tips and tricks, and hopefully help somebody who also wants to start painting, give them a little head start and see what they can do realistically painting your very first helmet. So my first bit of advice, as you can see the finished product here, but my first bit of advice is you're going to need a helmet. You're actually going to need two helmets. So one, you're going to start, and it's going to be a practice helmet. It's going to be something that you're going to try all of your techniques, start painting, sanding, doing everything that you need to on this one so that you can get a feel for how things work and what you're supposed to do, how the sandpaper and the paint react with the helmet, how far away you should hold your can, things like that. So to get started, just grab your test helmet or your practice helmet and start disassembling it. Right off the bat here, I pulled the vent piece off the chin and I broke it. I thought that I knew how to take that off, and apparently there was a little screw in there behind the padding that was also holding it on. So had this been my real helmet that I wanted to keep and do a good job on, I would have ruined it immediately. After that, you want to just disassemble the helmet as much as you can. You saw me take out some of those pads. I couldn't really take off anything else. And my advice to you would be is if you can't easily take it off, or you don't know how to take it off and then put it back on, you should probably just leave it on and tape around it or find a way to work around it. Otherwise, you could ruin your helmet immediately, just like I did on this one. But we're going to press forward anyways, so just giving this helmet a little bit of a wipe down because it is a used helmet that I am not planning on using anymore. So just cleaning it up. Any of the stickers or dirt, I used some goof off just to break down. We just want this pretty clean so that when we start sanding, you don't get dirt and grease and glue clogging up your sandpaper. So while we wait for me to do this, now's a good time to mention that a project like this, although the videos online might make it seem like you could do it in a weekend or 3 or 4 days, actually is going to take several weeks. Probably in this case where we have several different colors that we're going to be spraying on the helmet. Each color, in my experience here, will take at least a day. And so, plan your schedule out accordingly to be able to take on 2-3 weeks to be able to complete a project like this if you just work straight through. Also, apologize in advance. This video is going to be pretty long, but I really do want to go into depth and detail as much as I can on a lot of these items. There's a lot of stuff that you just don't think about if you've never painted anything before, that the videos don't show you. And so we'll just try to include everything so that you can take it from start to finish and have a pretty good chance of success. Also worth mentioning, the video format or the steps that I followed are from another video from a channel. I'll have a link in the description from E2E is the painter. He paints a similar helmet in a similar style on his channel. His video is about 10 or 15 minutes long, give you the Cliff's Notes versions of what's going on and how to do it, but doesn't really go into any detail on, what to do if you encounter certain problems or how to do things like this, like apply the tape. So we'll just get going right here. Once the helmet's clean, you're going to want to mask off all of these rubber trim pieces around the face and the neck. I was unaware that there's several different types of masking tape with different with varying tackiness, and so I just had this blue painter's tape that I'd used on painting things around the house. I thought it would be good to just start masking off this rubber portion, but as you'll see here in a second, I found that the blue tape actually doesn't stick to the rubber at all. So, first lesson learned, when you're taping up these rubber parts, you're going to have to get a stickier tape. This regular household blue painter's tape just won't work. So I had purchased some yellow tape, which I believe is more tacky. It seemed to work pretty good, and you'll see here in a little bit that although it does work, in the end, I ended up buying even a third more sticky tape, an orange color, and I believe that they make a red color that's even more sticky. So look at the brand of tape, I believe, is 3M, and if you wanted to look at their products or their website, you could probably determine. But this is what I used, and it seemed to work. Well, it worked well enough, and you're going to find out that I'm going to take all this off anyways, because during the sanding process, you wet sand, and it's going to get all wet, and it's going to peel the tape off anyways. So, but let's go through the technique of taping around these rubber joints. As you can see, you want to just press the tape on as much as you can, and then get a razor knife and just gently score around right where the rubber and the helmet meet. Right down in there, there's going to be a spot where the tape isn't touching the rubber or the helmet, where it bridges over, and you just want to get the knife right in that little spot and run it around. Then that way you can peel the tape off the helmet portion, and it'll stay stuck to the rubber portion and give you a clean line for when you paint. The paint will start and stop exactly where you want it to. And now we're just going to do the same to the rubber around the front face of the helmet. You can see that once I put the tape down, I like to really press it into that gap between the rubber and the helmet, with a fingernail or just something that's kind of pointy and blunt, to get that tape to wrap around the gasket, the rubber gasket, so that when you cut it, the tape has wrapped over the edge of the rubber and is as close to the helmet as possible. And I'd recommend, even though, like I said, and we'll see that this tape is going to fall off, and I'm going to take it off anyways when I'm sanding, I do recommend that you do tape your rubber portions of the helmet while you sand and before sanding, because when you're trying to sand the helmet right up to that rubber piece, it's really easy to have the sandpaper rub up against the rubber and can ruin your rubber, make it look, dull or scratchy. And on a brand new helmet, that would be a bummer to just ruin it right off the bat again. So put it on at the very least at this point as a protectant against the sandpaper that we're going to use to sand the actual helmet. All right, at this point, now that you've got the helmet masked up, we're going to start sanding, wet sanding with 800 grit sandpaper. So in order to wet sand, you see I've just got a tub of water. You can spray water on. Some people, I think, use water with a little bit of soap in it, but just regular water will work just fine. And you want to just make sure that the surface that you're sanding and your sandpaper is wet. That'll keep the sandpaper from getting clogged and keep everything smooth and working as it should. If you don't have any of this wet sandpaper, I just ordered mine from Amazon. Just look it up there and purchase some. So I started with the 800, and I felt like it was going too slowly, although the 800 is what was recommended. That was a mistake. You can see I've gone down to a more aggressive grit sandpaper in hopes that I might speed up this process, and this was just a big learning moment for me. So, you can either take my advice or you can do the same thing. I went from 800 down to 400, down to 240, it looks like. And all this is doing is, while it does remove the material faster, it's leaving really big grooves in the helmet, in the surface, that when you paint over it are going to show back up. So I would recommend just getting the 800 grit sandpaper, and it's going to take a lot of time sanding. In fact, if I set a timer on the sanding that I did for this helmet, all in all, from start to finish, it was almost 4 hours of sanding, and that's going to include me using a lot of methods that you'll see here in a second that are just completely wrong and really, really bad ideas. So first pro tip, get the 800 grit sandpaper and just stick with it, and have some patience, and just know that that's going to give you the best result in the shortest amount of time. So here I got the orbital sander out, probably with some like 200 grit sandpaper on it, and I felt like it was just going too slow. So I got this out, and you can see it's just burning straight through to the shell of the helmet. Then in turn, what that was doing is it was cutting down too deep in comparison to the surface of the rest of the helmet. So it was like giving the helmet like a wave effect. If you were to rub your hand over the top of it, instead of it being smooth and round, it was smooth but now wavy. So as soon as you painted over top of it and put some gloss on top of it, if you had a light shining on it, the light would reflect and be like a wavy looking light, and I didn't want that either. But at this point, I had gone this far. I just figured, well, what the heck? Let's just get after it with whatever I have, try and cut this down as much as I can. And then I was going to go back over it with the 800 grit and try and smooth it out. This is all just a bad idea. Like, just don't even do this. Just stick with the 800 grit. Take your time. Again, if this was like a good helmet that you wanted to keep and actually use, what I've done here so far has already ruined it. So, have patience with it. But on the other hand, while it was a mistake to do all this, it also was a pretty good learning moment. I was able to use these different grit sandpapers, see how they, how quickly they worked, how big of grooves they left, what damage they do, how long it takes to sand down, and things like that. So while, I did make a bad decision going to this, it was a good learning moment. And now I know in the future, and you'll see on the next helmet, I'll just pull out the 800 grit. We'll just stick with it and be done. So let's just bust through, all of this sanding. You can see here that the tape that I had on the helmet has already come off. I was just too impatient and wanted this to go a lot faster than it would. You watch any video online, they're going to tell you to sand, and then they'll cut the video and turn it back on and everything's sanded, and there's no way to tell how long it took them to sand it. But again, this helmet here, I have a couple of hours worth of time just in sanding. So be prepared to really take some time sanding, and this won't be the first time that we sand the helmet. You'll sand the helmet several times throughout the process. And don't forget that not only are we sanding the helmet, but we need to sand any of the pieces that we took off the helmet. In this case, the visor and the little mouthpiece that I broke off anyways. But anything that's going to get paint on it, we need to make sure that we sand down and try to achieve a nice smooth surface for the paint to stick to. Again, otherwise, any scrape, any bump or any dip or anything like that is in the surface of this helmet or the visor is going to show up in the new paint when we paint it. All right, now let's talk really quick about sanding over areas with ridges or grooves. And this little chin piece is a great example of a piece that has both ridges and grooves. You can see that as I rub the sandpaper over top, every time I rub the sandpaper back and forth, it really catches every single ridge or any point on that piece that goes up and is more prominent than the area around it. The sandpaper will really catch that area and really aggressively sand it. So those areas will get flattened if you're not careful really quickly. So just take your time in any area where there's a ridge or a groove, and just make sure that you're gently sanding around those areas, making sure to not just generally blast over everything like I was doing there. Otherwise, you're going to flatten all of your ridges and you're going to miss all of your grooves. So be careful on your ridges, and then just to get in your grooves, the best piece of advice I could give you is to just go slowly and gently. Fold the paper in half and slide it into the little cracks and crevices, and just give it a sanding back and forth. Otherwise, if you just completely miss those areas, then they're going to have a smooth surface, and when you put the new paint on top of it, the new paint won't stick, and you're going to have a point of failure. You're going to be able to see some of those here in the future as well. So make sure you just take your time. Don't blast over the ridges too aggressively, and don't forget and don't overlook getting in those small grooves. That's basically the first day of the project, what I got done. So on day 2, you can see I had the helmet in this state, pretty much sanded, but I still didn't like how uneven the surface was. So I decided to get out the air sander and some aggressive sandpaper, and this was a really bad idea. It was far too aggressive, although it did take the paint off really quickly. It made the surface of the helmet way too uneven. It's too hard to control. I left a bunch of gouges in it that just can't be undone. I was just frustrated with how slow it was going and how the first step turned out, that I threw a Hail Mary pass and it certainly did not land. So I'm going to buzz through this really quick. Just know that this is a bad idea as well. I do not recommend doing this unless you're really good at something like that, but I'm not. So just stay away. Just stick to that 800 grit sandpaper and take your time, and it'll come out in the end. So in the end, I still did want to try to have this turn out well, or give myself the best chance of replicating a real job, even though it was, there's certainly some things that I had done that were beyond repair. So I did decide I'm going to hit it one more time with some wet sanding, 800 grit sandpaper, just to try and make the surface, as smooth and as even as possible. So that when we got to painting, that I would still have a good chance of success doing that. So here I am, just wet sanding a little bit more. I'm going to do that to the whole helmet and the visor and the mouthpiece, and then we'll move on to painting. Now, after we've sanded everything and before we do any painting, you'll want to clean the surface again to make sure that there's no dust or sanding debris on anything, that it's clean and dry. So I just cleaned mine with some degreaser spray. You could use wax and grease remover. You could probably use something like Windex or anything that would leave a clean surface, and then just let it dry so it's completely dry, because you don't want to spray paint and have any water be underneath or in any of those gaps of the rubber gaskets or anything like that. So once we are ready to paint, I'm going to go ahead and mask up all of the rubber parts again. This time I'm using a little bit stronger tape. I bought this orange color tape, probably got it at Home Depot, and it sticks to the rubber much better than the yellow tape. So I would recommend using the orange tape to tape up these rubber gaskets around the neck and the face mask. Now this tape that we're putting on now is going to be the tape that stays on the helmet for the entirety of the painting process, pretty much. So you want to make sure that this is something that is done well, that it's stuck really well, and that when you cut it, that your lines are nice and straight and where they need to be. And really take your time here. If the cut you made or the tape didn't lay just right, just pull it back off and try it again. We're going to do it in just the same way as before. Put the tape on, press it down firmly, and then run the razor knife around the perimeter of the rubber gaskets and the helmet to just cut that line right in between both. You can see on this one that I didn't like that top piece for whatever reason, so I just peeled it off and tried it again. Once you're happy with all of the perimeter pieces, you need to seal the helmet off, the helmet insides off from the outside. So you're going to have to tape across the front of the open area of the face, or you can put a piece of painter's paper in there and tape to the paper, and then you'll have to tape around where your head goes in, around the neck hole. Same thing with some painter's paper or something. And I would recommend to not use something like newspaper or printer paper, because once the paint gets on that, it can bleed through. And so if you are going to use paper, get some paper that's specific for painting, or you can just run strips of tape all the way across that face mask and seal that off, as well as around the bottom. So I'll cruise through some of this because we've already seen it before, and we'll actually see it again when I start doing it on the helmet that I'll actually be painting and finishing. But did want to show here that this is how I kind of went about getting the paper, the painter's paper, on the inside of the helmet. I just taped on a few tabs of tape there, and then cut some painter's paper and slid that inside and pressed it into the back of it. And then just used some extra tape to fill in the gaps on any spot that I felt like tape or paint could have got through. Then I just taped up the back side of the chin piece as well. Just used tape on that part. And I got to a point where I needed to tape off the inside of the air vents. There's a couple of air vents that on the top and on the back of this helmet. And so I wanted to cover up the mesh so that paint didn't get inside and onto the foam or the headliner inside the helmet, and to keep that mesh its regular silver color. So what I did is I just put a piece of tape on top and I cut out the shape, but that's a bad idea because once you press that tape in, it's actually too small to cover the mesh inside. So I went about it this way and trying to get that tape inside and up and under the shell of the helmet. I was going to try and cut underneath, and so that the tape was a little bit larger than the hole. That kind of worked, but in the end, what you should probably do is just cut a piece of tape that's a good bit larger than the hole, and then use something gentle to squeeze it in there and press it in and around the vent. And that way the mesh screen will stay clean, and you can pull that out later. And avoid doing what I did here by accidentally pressing too hard with that screwdriver, and I actually just pressed both of the mesh vents back into the helmet and ruined those. So again, I didn't know how hard you could press on those things, but I guess however hard I pressed on them was too hard. So I thought, oh well, whatever, we'll just move on. I'm going to tape up the neck hole or the head hole of the helmet. Going to go around the rubber again with that same orange tape that stuck really well. And then on this part, you want to tape up and inside the helmet because you'll want to put the helmet on something that keeps it upright rather than just resting it on the rim. Something like a small flower pot or In my case, I end up using a can of paint thinner and something to just hold the helmet in place and steady. So, tape around the rubber, cut around the outside just like we did before, peel off any of the excess tape, and get ready to start actually painting. Then once I had all this tape on, what I did is any of those, so the visor or that chin piece that I took off, I ended up just taping those to a little wooden stick, something that I could hold while I spray them, and then place it somewhere else so that they can set up and dry without being touched. Now let's get us set up and ready to spray. Like I said, I put the helmet onto a can of paint thinner. I didn't care if it got sprayed. And I started here just in the garage in the open. And since this was a helmet that I took all the way down to the plastic shell, I thought it might be smart to put on this plastic primer. I don't know if that was the right strategy or not, and you'll see here in a little bit, because what this should do is bind to the plastic and make it so that it makes a better adhesion between plastic and paint. But where it got laid on top of some of the areas that already had paint, we'll see that either that caused a problem with peeling paint, or I didn't sand the area enough, which seems a little bit unlikely, or I didn't clean it well enough and I got some sort of oil or grease that made it so that the paint didn't stick like it should. But in any regard, just follow your can's directions on how to spray this. One tip that I would have, and you'll see it again on some future sprays, is that although I have the helmet set up well and it's pretty level, you're going to miss spraying spots like right here if you don't intentionally get down and underneath. You're going to find that once you spray the color, it's going to be really thin on these low spots. So just pay attention to those, giving everything a good even coating. This particular adhesion promoter recommended that we put on 3 coats with a 10-minute wait time in between each coat. So here I am just putting on those 3 coats. I didn't know if I had to wait for this to fully cure before I did the actual primer, but I didn't wait for it to fully cure. I just waited my last 10 minutes and then went straight on to the primer. So again, follow your can's directions on how to spray. This one, advise that you stay about 6 to 8 inches away from the helmet. Try to keep everything in smooth motions. And one tip that I would add is that if you find that when you're spraying your color specifically, that you go over an area and it's too light, rather than going over it again and again to try and fill it in on that pass, just let it dry, wait your 10 minutes, then go over it again on your next pass slightly again. That color will fill in. Otherwise you risk just laying it on too heavy and getting a run or some sort of problem because you're putting it on too much at once. And that's a great segue into what my first painting tip would be, is that you'll see I'm gonna do the primer right now. I'm gonna do 4 coats of primer, but your first coat of not only primer but of any of your color paint should also be a very light coat. You should be able to see through still, and whatever was behind the paint when you started, you should still be able to faintly see through again. So on your first coat, you want to do a light dusting coat. Give that its 10 minutes in this case to tack up. And then on your coats 2, 3, and 4, if you're going to do 4 coats, then you can go on a little bit heavier. So do that, and then when you're spraying, another tip that is going to help you make sure that you don't get runs or splatter on your surface, spraying the paint before the can is parallel or over the helmet, and stop spraying the paint after the stream is clear of the helmet. So I'll try and demonstrate that here. You can see I start before the can is over the helmet, and then I stop after it already passes, just like that. So before I start and after I've passed over, and then I shut it off again after I've passed it, just like that. Otherwise, if you start spraying with the can directly pointed at the helmet, there's a pretty good chance that that first spritz of paint is going to shoot out a glob or some heavy droplets or something that you won't be able to just smooth over. They won't just lay out and smooth down on their own. You'll have to go back, let them dry, and sand them down. So finish up your 4 coats. Like I said, light, even coats. If you need to go over it, 4, 5 times, make sure your coats are light and even, and don't get impatient. Otherwise, you're going to have to, like I said, you're going to get runs, then you're going to have to let it dry, then you're going to have to go back and sand it all down, and just create more work for yourself. So here I am. This is the end of the first day. I'm going to finish up with my primer. I am going to let this dry, so per the can's instruction, you can touch this, or it becomes safe to touch after about 20 minutes, I believe, but it's not actually fully cured and hardened for 24 hours. So I'm going to let this sit overnight and into the next day before I start the next step, which is going to be prepping the surface again for an even surface by doing more wet sanding. And before we do that, I wanted to add this little video here. So this is after those 4 coats of primer. I have not sanded it yet, but you can clearly see that I have ruined this helmet doing that orbital sander, or the air compressor sander that I was running. You can see the surface of the helmet is really dimply and uneven or wavy. There's several spots here at the top that have big gouges. Stuff like that. If you wanted, if you took it this far and you really wanted to try and save the helmet, you'd have to fill it with some sort of filler. But just wanted to let you know, like, or just show you how clearly your gouges and your scrapes and your dents and things like that will just show up or accentuate once you start painting. Paint won't fill in the gaps. It'll only make it look more prominent. Back on, starting day 2. The first thing we need to do on day 2 is, now that the primer is fully cured, we need to go back over it again and give it a light sanding. We're going to do wet sanding again with 800 grit sandpaper. The objective to this isn't to burn through the primer and take it back down to the original shell or the original paint, but to just give the whole surface a scuffing and give that new paint something to grab onto. So just be gentle with it. We want to cover all of the surface again, sand all of the nooks and the crannies, and just get this thing ready with a nice dull or matte finish again. And this is a good opportunity if you do have any paint splatters or drips. This is when you're going to address them. You don't want to sand any of the paint or primer before it's fully cured. Otherwise, you're going to gum up the sandpaper and ruin the paint job. So just go over this all again with wet sanding paper, 800 grit. And then once I did that, I dried it off with a rag and blew it off with an air compressor just to make sure that it was really dry. You definitely don't want any water on here, obviously, because paint does not stick to water. So now that we're going to do is start to prep the helmet for paint. You want to wear some gloves so that the oils from your hands don't get onto the surface. And we're going to clean it again with some wax and grease remover or some sort of painting prep solution. Once I had that all wiped down, I set it on my paint thinner can to prop it up and was ready to start spraying the first color. Now, if you remember, I'm following the instructions given from this E2E paint channel. Martin, I believe, is the guy's name. And in his tutorial, his instructions were on this base coat to do it in one continuous big spray. So you want to just cover the thing with one thick coat. You want to move around a lot, make sure that you're not getting too heavy in any spot, but you do want to run the whole piece or the whole part of the helmet with one big spray. I don't know why he recommends that, but after spraying it, I believe it has to do something with kind of the pearl in this particular paint color that probably lays down and spreads out better if you do it in that manner. Otherwise, this is the only color that requires you to do it in one big spray. Every other coat of paint that we put on this helmet will be done in several smaller layers. So as you can see here, I'm just trying to go over each piece without taking my hand off the nozzle. We're spraying the whole way. Before I started spraying, I got a good plan in my head to make sure that I knew, to get those thin edges on each side of the visor, and just make sure that I could cover it completely and evenly without getting any drips or runs. So here you can see how my part turned out. I was a little bit worried because it did look like there were some darker gray splotches, but as it dried, it did kind of lay a little bit flatter and even itself out to a perfectly even sheen. So if yours does the same thing, just be aware that that could happen. And then the other tip I would want to give you here is just make sure that when you're ready to paint this, this helmet part, make sure that you have an area that you can walk all the way around. Otherwise, if you're trying to walk back and forth and stop and spin the helmet, you will probably get subpar results because of that. Again, though, I don't know if doing this in 2 or 3 coats would yield the same result, but following his instructions, that's how I did it, and it does turn out really well. And again, if you remember when I put on the primer, how I had that chin piece pointed too far down and it was hard to get underneath right there at the bottom of the chin. Well, there you go. I'm doing it again, and it's going to be something that I notice after I'm done spraying, and I have to stop and adjust the helmet and move it back up so that I can spray under that chin piece better. So just do that. Just spray all around. Make sure you're moving the can, moving it all around, trying to get as even as possible, and give this color only one big coat, and then we'll go back to doing the several coats with all the other colors. So here it is the next day after it's fully cured. You can see that the color of the paint really did even out, became nice and smooth and uniform. But I also wanted to show this too because it shows again just when I messed up sanding the helmet, all of these grooves and imperfections that were left from that big air sander. I mean, now that we've got a fresh coat of paint on there, it just accentuates all of those. So if this is any indication as to, when you're prepping your helmet and when you're sanding it down, what you can expect if you decide to cut some corners, well, this is the result you're going to get. So otherwise, though, the paint does look really good. All right, now we can start doing the taping to block off the silver from the blue colors that we're going to paint. To start us off, I'm using this thin green tape. It's a little bit more flexible. It's not very tacky, so it's going to peel back easier when you're done spraying with less of a chance of you peeling up the paint that you've already put on, which, because of the mistakes I made in this area right here, you're going to find out that this tape will also just peel off the paint that's on there because I did something wrong. But to get some taping tips, first thing I wanted to do is I just wanted to line this tape parallel to the visor, or not the visor, the goggles opening, the face opening right here. Just wanted to lay it parallel and run a line straight up, but you'll notice that once I hit a certain point, because the helmet's round, once I hit a certain point, it starts to come together on the top of the helmet in sort of a V, which I don't want to have. So I need to find a point somewhere between the top of the helmet and the center and the midpoint on the side where I can kind of change that angle without it being noticeable. And I just kind of chose the spot where the visor bolts in. That should be something that kind of gives me a chance to move the line where the tape is being laid without it being completely noticeable. I'm not sure if that's what they do on the real helmets, but it turned out pretty good for me. So what I'm going to do here is just try and put this tape on as straight as possible. Like I said, parallel with the line for the face opening. And a little tip on doing the tape work is you can see I'm trying to pull that pretty tight because I do want this to be straight. But if you pull it too tight, it's going to peel back. You're stretching it just a little bit, and then once you lay it down, it will retract and pull itself up off of the helmet in any of these dips areas, like right here or right here. So although you do want to be firm with it, don't pull it too tight. In fact, don't pull it very tight at all. Otherwise, it will retract and peel back, and then when you spray your color, a fine mist of the spray will go underneath the spot that is pulled up from the valley, and you're going to get spray that's in color in areas that you don't want it to be, and you won't have a nice crisp line. So there'll be other examples of this later on that we'll go over after I've sprayed. All right, so I'm just going to bust through some of this initial taping. It's pretty straightforward. There's a couple tips I'd give though. One of them is when you're trying to pattern this out, it has kind of a silver and a blue checkerboard pattern. Remember that when you find the center of the helmet or the center line where your colors are going to transition, that you don't put the tape in the center of the line. The tape needs to go to either the right or the left side of that line so that the line ends up being in the middle. A good example is you can see right here, right where the visor bolts in. I have the tape on the left side of the helmet, slightly to the left of that hole, but on the right side of the helmet, you can see here that it's directly over top of the hole, and that's going to make it so that when I tape off the helmet and then I paint it, that the colors will land, the center line of those colors will land at the exact same spot, or very close to anyways. So another thing that we want to, another tip that we could give you when doing these tape lines is, lay your tape out, and then once you find a spot like this that overlaps, use a little razor knife and very, very gently, you can use the tape that's underneath it as a guide or a line to trim off your excess from the line that you just drew. So I'll show you right here on the back is a pretty good example. I'm going to use the existing tape line as a guide. I'm going to put my next line over exactly right on top of that. We'll bring it around, and then I'm going to really quick just check with a ruler the height of each of those pieces of tape just to see if they're matching up on each side. Obviously the bottom of one side and the top of the other should be roughly the same to provide a straight line. But then once we get to the back section where these where the tape is crossing over each other and we need that to come to a fine point, I'm going to use the existing tape underneath to just gently score and use that as a guide to make sure that my points come together just perfectly. You see how I did that there? Now I'm going to do it again on the other side on the one corner, and that should allow us to have 2 points touch perfectly in the middle without overlapping, just like that. So now when I tape off the bottom left and the top right side and spray the blue color, we know that the blue color is going to meet at the center location in the helmet. And one more time here on each side, you can see how I used the first tape line that I put down as a guide to run my second line, then use the razor knife to bring that to a really sharp point. Now here's an example of something we're going to see. I'm going to try to do the same thing, but this is where I'm going to run into one of the problems that we brought up earlier about me not prepping the surface well enough or having some sort of problem, because As soon as I pull this tape off, you're going to see I'm going to peel up a bunch of paint as well. This is the perfect example of why you need to start on a helmet that is just going to be a learner helmet or a practice helmet, because if this was my real helmet that I wanted to do really nice and have it look good and be displayed or used or whatever, this would have ruined it. I would have had to peel all this back, sand the helmet all the way back down, respray, and probably lost 2 full days worth of work. And especially if you're further along, since that was just the first layer of paint. If you're on layer 5 or 6 or 8 and you had something peel up like that, man, it could be disastrous. So make sure that you're prepping really good, and hopefully things like this won't happen to you. But I did try to give it just a quick fix. I sprayed some of the paint into a bowl and then just tried to touch it up a little bit. I mean, obviously this helmet's shot anyways, but I thought, why not? In the end, that little spot right there probably would have been covered up with some other color or something different. I could have worked around it too if I didn't want to touch it up, but it doesn't matter. So then all I'm going to do is use this thicker tape to go around and mask off all of the parts that I want to keep gray, and prepare, to put on the blue color. So we'll just cover up every spot that we want to keep gray with this yellow tape, and we'll get ready to start spraying color number 2. All right, we'll work through this one pretty quick, and all of the colors I will leave in the description of the video. So we're going to use the same process on these color coats as the beginning with the primer. We're going to do several light coats. On this particular blue, I did 4 coats. And you can see that my technique is a little bit off, but as we hit coats 3 and 4, I do try to follow the contour of the helmet back and forth. And with coat 3, you can really see that the color is starting to fill in and cover up that gray really good. So one thing that happened was on my first pass, there was a blob, or it left a big splotch of paint on the top here, and I'll go over that, show you up close what that looks like and how we can fix it. But pretty straightforward. Again, hold the can 6 to 8 inches out from the surface, start spraying, and before you get to the helmet, stop spraying after you've passed over the helmet, and try to follow the contour, the shape of the helmet as you're spraying, so that you can lay it on evenly and not get any spot too heavy or too light. So that's coat number 4 of the blue, and we'll just move on from this because we're going to go over it again with the real helmet from here. So now take a look here. You can see that the nozzle got clogged, or my glove got in the way or something, and it really spattered some big globs of paint on there. That's no problem. All you need to do is take some more wet sanding paper. We're going to unmask it all and then start doing some wet sanding. So a quick note on unmasking. We talked about it a little bit before, but the best way to do it, I found, is to paint the helmet, paint whatever color you're doing, let it tack up, give it 20 or 30 minutes or whatever the can recommends before it's touch dry but not fully cured. Then gently remove the tape, and then let it sit another full day to cure and harden properly, and then start sanding. So that's where we're at this point. And what we're trying to accomplish is just to even out the imperfections that you may have made when spraying the helmet. Like I had that little accident where it globbed up. You can sand that down, make it even. You don't want to sand all the way through, so that you don't want to sand through the blue and back into the gray. If you do that, you've gone too far. But if you do happen to make a mistake like that, you can always mask it back up, give it another coat of blue, let it cure, sand it back down again. So it's not impossible to fix your mistakes. You can also see that when I peeled off the tape, I don't have it on camera, but I peeled off even more of the paint on that right side. So I'm just going to let it be for now. Going to clean it up, dry it up really good, and just start prepping it for the next color of paint. Also wanted to show here that this is what it looks like after I've sanded it. You can see that it's a little bit more dull, and you can see that all of those high spots or orange peel type effect is kind of sanded down, especially those couple of big blobs there. I could have even sanded those more and smoothed them out more, but didn't really care to at this point. So let's move on. All right, so now let's get prepared to start doing the two-tone paint, the two-tone silver and the two-tone blue. To do that, we're going to put some decals on the helmet, and then we'll paint over the decals, remove the decals, and it'll leave us with two different colors, you know, kind of a two-tone effect. So when you're putting on these decals, you know, in this case, I just put them on in kind of a unorganized, scattered pattern. I didn't want there to be like any sort of uniformity or reason that they went in any particular spot. So I just kind of threw them on, and where this is the test helmet, I didn't put as many on as I normally would, or I will on the actual helmet that we'll be painting later. But you just want to put these on, press them in, make sure that they're nice and stuck to the helmet. And one thing that I'll say here while we're on this subject is that remember, we're going to be painting different colors and different decals. So for example, we're going to have a big sun and a big Red Bull on the top, you know, middle side portions, and there's going to be a big text Red Bull on the chin portion on either side. So don't bother putting any of these decals of these two-tone paint directly underneath those. So that's a mistake that I'll make on the other helmet, is I'll put a couple that are just basically directly underneath the sun. And so I did all this work to give it this cool two-tone paint, and then I just painted a big yellow circle right over top of it. And all it does is create more work and, you know, provide more room for more room for error, more ways to screw up on something. So, you know, keep it, if you want to keep it in a kind of an unorganized pattern, that's cool, but then just kind of be mindful of generally where those other items are going to land, and you don't have to, you know, you'll save yourself a little bit of work in the end. So I'll just speed through this. I mean, all we're going to do is put these decals on, and then we're going to paint silver, another tone of silver next. So I will tape up, you know, the blue section with, I'll use the green fine line tape to get my lines nice and straight. Luckily, you know, using the blue line that's already there, it'll be easy to get on really quick. And then once we have that on, I'm going to use the thicker yellow tape to just tape over all of the blue spots, and then we'll get into taping, or we'll get into painting. And just as a reminder, in spots like this, you can overlap the tape that you're using, and as long as you're really gentle with the razor knife, you can use the one piece of tape that you've overlapped as a guide to cut straight, and then you can remove, see, like that little corner there, and your corners are going to come out really crisp and perfectly straight. Just don't go too deep with the knife and cut into your paint, or else you're going to risk peeling later. So we'll finish this up and get to painting. All right, so now we got this all taped up and we're ready to start prepping for paint again. So first thing we want to do is get some gloves on and wipe down the area that we're going to paint with some wax and grease remover, just to make sure that we didn't leave any oils, you know, from our hand on that's going to ruin the paint. And then it was getting a little cold when I was doing this, so I did create a little paint booth in the garage. So if you happen to have an old Volkswagen or something, in the garage as well. You can make a paint booth out of it. But this step, the paint booth is not necessary, but I will say it is helpful in containing some of the overspray and just making sure that you don't make a mess of things around the garage or wherever you're doing this. So like I said before, I'll leave all of the paint descriptions and colors in the comments or in the description of the video below. And we're just going to start painting this using the same technique as before. Light first coat, lighter second coat, heavier third coat or fourth coat maybe. And obviously you're not going to see it here on camera, but I am waiting in between these coats 10, 15 minutes around there. Actually, I think it was, with some of these colors, it's a little different. So it might have been even 8 to 10 minutes between coats. Just let it sit, tack up, and then go on, recoat it with coats 2, 3, 4, or however many you feel you need. So once you have this all sprayed, I'm going to show you here what I was talking about earlier, where an area where I pulled the tape, the green tape, too tightly, and it came up out of the valley that it was supposed to be in. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture after I pulled the tape off, but you can see exactly what I'm talking about here. Once I stretched the tape up and let it set, even though I pressed it down firmly, you can see right there in that corner that it popped back up and pulled away from the helmet. And when you spray, that shiny silver, a little bit of that paint's going to get right underneath that tape and going to bleed out into the blue spot that you have covered. So that's just a really good example again of something you want to really try to avoid if you want to do a good job. And you might as well try and do a good job if you're going to go through all this trouble. So next up we're going to do is talk a little bit really quick about peeling the tape off of the helmet. So at this point, I've let the helmet sit for about 40 minutes or so, and you can see that I can touch it, but the paint isn't fully cured. So what you want to do is just try and find something that you can peel up a small corner of the tape. And then when you're peeling the tape away from the helmet, you want to keep it at a pretty sharp angle. So I'll show you here. Every time I pull it, instead of just pulling like straight up at like a 90-degree angle on the tape and against the helmet, you want to keep that angle pretty sharp. Like bring it so that you're always pulling so that the tape is peeling off at a point where possible. So you can see how I kind of fold the tape over and pull downward instead of just straight out. You can see it more on this side. And if you pay attention, it looks like we peeled off even more paint on that one side where I don't know why it wasn't sticking in that one spot. But so see how much of an angle I have that tape at as I'm pulling it off the helmet. And what that's going to do is just make sure that line between the tape and the helmet of paint breaks cleanly. Otherwise, it can promote the paint kind of stretching and then breaking in an uneven way. So just be careful and go slow. There's no reason to rush this. You can see this is real time right there. I'm not peeling it off like a Band-Aid. Just take your time, let it do its thing, and keep that angle that you're pulling it at a really sharp angle. You also don't need to press that tape down very hard. I mean, the level at which the tape is adhered to the helmet, you really want the green strip to be the one that's going to be, creating the clean line. But this yellow tape, like all it's doing is blocking the paint from landing on the blue. So when you're putting on that yellow tape, you really don't need to go in and mash it down really hard, because all that's going to do is make it harder to peel it off and, increase the risk of that yellow tape grabbing the paint and pulling it off the helmet as well. So just be gentle. It needs to be covered fully, but it doesn't need to be pressed firmly. Next up, let's talk a little bit about removing these decals. Full disclaimer here, you don't want to remove the decals yet. We still have to do the shiny blue color, but I knew that there was a couple that weren't going to overlap in between the blue and the gray, and I wanted to just see how the decals reacted, taking them off and how they peeled off. So I did start to peel off the ones that I knew were purely in the silver color that I knew didn't need to be painted again. So, when we do the real helmet, we won't be doing it in this same order exactly. But I started off peeling them up with this razor knife, but I found it to be a little bit too aggressive. So I went and you'll see later on in the video, I started using these little plastic razor blades because the razor knife it's too easy to get underneath the decal and then cut into the paint and then peel up a little bit of paint as well. I know a lot of the professional painters that you see probably use the razor knife just fine, but they've probably painted hundreds of things where I haven't. So if you could just start off using those plastic razors to peel up the tape and to peel off your decals, you're going to be doing yourself a favor and your results will be much better. All right, so at this point, I feel like I've made all the mistakes that I need to make. I've answered all of my own questions on paint prep, painting, how the decals, how taping and removing the decals are going to go. So a lot of the helmet painting is just rinse and repeat, sand, clean, paint, remove the tape, let it dry, sand, clean, paint, remove the tape, let it dry, over and over again. So at this point, like I said, I'd done everything that I want to, and figured I was going to just start on the regular helmet. So check this out though here. Here's a piece of the visor from the helmet, the test helmet, and you can see that, this is how it's supposed to look. It looks pretty good. The lines are crisp. The two-tone paint is a cool feature. So let's not waste any more time and let's get right into doing the actual helmet. All right, we got a brand new helmet and a much better idea of what it's going to take to get a good result with this one. I'm going to start by disassembling it carefully, and I'm not going to take off any of the pieces. I'm not going to take off the mouthpiece or anything that I know that I can't get off, but I am going to just remove any stickers that are on there. I had some trouble with that one. You can see I used some goof off to just remove some of that sticker residue. And at this point, that's about it on this brand new helmet. It looks good. So I just went straight into taping up the vents. So I used a little different technique on this one than the last one. And what I did is I took a piece of tape, like I said before, that was larger than the size of the hole of the vent. And then I folded over just the edges of the tape so that they could slide in easier, but it still had kind of like on the back side, it still had the tacky part that would hold it in place. So you can see I just fold over the edges, and then instead of using a screwdriver or a small screwdriver, I use this tiny pick with a little hook on the end. Not a hook, but like it just bends over at a 90-degree angle, and that allowed me to just slide these pieces of tape up into the hole and then spread them out so that they covered the vent completely and went underneath the shell of the helmet, and they worked out perfectly just like that. So you can watch me here. I'm just going to gently push it in, wiggle it around, and then set it in place and move on to the next one. Okay, so now that I have those vents all plugged up, I'm going to just put a piece of paper or a piece of tape in the thread holes for where the visor mounts to the helmet, just to make sure I don't get any paint in those and gunk up the threads. If you did get paint in there, it wouldn't be the end of the world, but might as well, if you think of it, put something in there. It'll make it so that the screws that mount the visor on the helmet go in and out a lot easier without having to clean those when it's time to use it. And then after that, just started to mask around the perimeter of the helmet, just again using that orange tape that we found worked best on the other helmet, and just used the same technique. Just went over, pressed it right into that groove really good, went all the way around, make sure that it laid well and that it adhered well, and then once I got it all pressed on and in place, just went around it with a razor knife and gently cut it away from the helmet, leaving it only adhered to the rubber gasket around the bottom and the face area of the helmet. You can see I accidentally peeled off a little bit more tape than I wanted. No big deal, just put another piece on top of it, press it in, and cut it back. Also, you probably saw that I put a bunch of the painter's paper on the inside of the helmet so that I can put that helmet back on top of the same can as I had the other. And then I just moved on to 800 grit wet sanding. So I'll speed through this. We'll stop in just a second to talk about a couple of things, but all in all, I spent about 40 minutes wet sanding this helmet with 800 grit. That's the only grit that I used. I didn't try to do anything crazy or too aggressive. Just take your time, sand around. Like we talked about before, try and take your time going over the ridges, anything that points out. You'll sand faster, and all of the grooves or anything that goes in might even get missed. So you'll see here in a minute, once I get sanded and kind of wipe off the helmet and let it dry a little bit, you'll be able to see all of the shiny spots that I missed when sanding. And so all I'm going to do is, once it dries, look at the helmet, see all the shiny spots that I missed. Most of them were in the grooves, and then just go back and gently, with a rolled piece of sandpaper or a folded piece of sandpaper, go back in there and get into those little areas without being too aggressive, because when the sandpaper is folded in half like that, it is easy to sand off a lot more than you think all at once. So here's what I'm talking about. I'll zoom in here and you can see that there's a couple low spots just throughout the helmet that show up as shiny. And I'm just going to take my time and just go over any of those shiny spots again to make sure that the whole helmet has a nice uniform matte, or kind of like a non-shiny finish. You're going to want to really take your time on this as well. Just make sure that it all looks good, because like we saw on the other helmet, this is the base for everything that's going to go on top of it. If there's one small spot that isn't sanded well enough, or get some oil or grease on it from your hands, then it's going to be ruined from that point. So really do just take your time, go through everything. Once I got it all sanded, I cleaned it up with some wax and grease remover, and then I just let it set. Came back the next day, put on some gloves, and washed it one more time with some wax and grease remover just to make sure there's no dust or oils or grease on it from my hands. And we're going to start putting on that first layer of primer. So for this clip, I'm going to keep it in real time. And again, look at the description below for the color codes and product information. But I'm going to just spray this in real time so that you can see this first layer, this base layer, isn't meant to give coverage or to go over it in such a way that you're blocking out the base color, like the blue in this case, or the white. It just is a light coating that will start to create a layer that will adhere to the helmet. So just resist the urge to think you want to put a whole bunch on. Just give it one light pass and let it sit and do its thing before you go to the next pass. Remember, if it's too light, you can always just go over it again and put more on later. But if you put too much on at once and it runs, then you have to wait for it to dry and cure, and then sand it back down, and then probably spray it again. So just resist the urge to go too heavy on these initial coats. And then, if I'm critiquing myself on this, I think I'm doing a pretty good job of starting the spray before it hits the helmet. as I moved left to right, and then ending the spray after I've already passed over the helmet. One thing that I'm probably doing wrong is it looks like maybe my can is a little bit too far away from the helmet, but it did go on pretty smooth, so you're just going to have to judge for yourself. Also, you'll notice that I put that chin piece up a little bit higher, and it does make it a lot easier for me to spray that bottom part of the helmet there. So let's move on to coat number 2. We just saw coat number 1. I waited my 10 or so minutes, whatever the can indicated, before I started spraying coat number 2, and here's coat number 2. And I'm just going to do another light coat on this one. Don't want to go too heavy, and make sure that you get all sides. So another thing I'll note is the initial plan was, you notice I didn't spray the bottom side of that visor. The initial plan was I was going to just spray everything, and then at the very end I was going to mask off the visor and spray it one color, like a gray color or something underneath it. So that's why I didn't spray the bottom part of that visor on this particular helmet. So we'll just speed through coat number 2. Speed through coat number 3 as well, but with every coat you can see that the coverage gets a little bit more. On coat number 4, which we're starting right now, I did try to go a little bit thicker, and you should be good with 4 coats, but in this case I knew I had just a little bit left in the can and could go a little bit more, and there was still a little bit of that blue showing through, so I went ahead and just did 5 coats of this. It turned out really well. Everything went on really smooth, and I was really happy with how the primer turned out. So now that I got 5 coats on, I let it dry overnight, and then I came back, and I'll be honest, I'm using a red Scotch-Brite to kind of scuff this up. I know everything sprayed really, really smooth, and I didn't have any runs or drips or anything that was going to hold me back, so I probably just hit it with this red Scotch-Brite to scuff the surface again in preparation for the first coat of color. But to ensure the best result, you probably want to just go over it again with 800 grit wet sanding and make sure it's all looking really smooth. Especially if you had any runs or drips that you have to sand out, you might do that and then have to give it one more coat of primer, let it cure, and do another round of wet sanding. But now that that's sanded, you're going to want to clean it one more time, wax and grease remover just the same. And then we're going to apply this base coat of gray. And if you remember, this is the only paint we're going to put on that goes against all the other instruction that we've already given. I'm not sure why. I think, like I said before, I think it has something to do with like the pearl or the metallic in the paint. But Martin recommended that you do this in one big shot, that you don't stop spraying. You just spray it on. What you can see that I've done is I do try to put it on in light coats back and forth, never staying in one spot very long. Otherwise, you are going to get some drips and runs. And just spray and keep that can moving no matter what, and go over as many passes as you need to just fill everything in. So we'll keep this at real time so you can see this whole big spray. But yeah, you can see like this first pass, just a really light coating, and I tried to just keep moving around and around. One thing that you can do that will really help is just make sure that before you start this, that you have a plan in your head as to how you're going to go around and what areas you're going to want to hit, or make sure that you hit, like underneath the chin, right there in that face, like right there where I'm getting, was a mental note that I knew I had to not forget to get down there. So just keep moving it around, spraying, and that should give you a nice even coat. It'll flow out well and make that color be really uniform and look really good. So we'll just finish up here. I'll let this play in real time like I said, and you can see how it turns out. All right, so now that that's done, all I need to do is start taping up again to block off the sections that are going to stay gray and that I'm going to paint blue. So with this ruler, I'm just marking some center points so that I can make sure that my tape line is straight. So I know we went over this with the other helmet, but just use some landmarks like the curves or the screw mounting holes in the helmet or the vent holes or something, so you can kind of just gauge what the center is. And then remember, when you're doing this, the center line, the tape doesn't go directly over the center line. It has to go on either side of the center line, depending on if it's going to be taped up or left open. So I wanted to show this one here too. So if you recall on the last one, there were several instances where I pulled the tape too hard and it ended up lifting in those valleys. So here's a good example of me just taking my time and not pulling the tape too hard when I'm laying it down, so it'll stay adhered in those tight places. So one more thing, another tip is, now that I have the tape on one side of the line, you can see that on the left side of the helmet, well, the right side of the helmet, but the left side of the screen, I actually need a piece of tape on the other side of the line. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the existing tape that I already put down as a guide. I can just run a new piece of tape right to the side of that, press it down. It'll be perfectly straight and right in line with where it needs to be. And then once I've got it laid down good, I can go back and I can cut the other side, the one on the left side, off, and it'll leave me with the perfect line right in the center where I need it. All right, since we've already seen me do this once before, and I think you've got the general idea of what to do, and I've given about all the instruction that I know how to give on taping this up, let's just buzz through this, and we'll pick up again when we're ready to start painting the first coat of blue. Oh, and don't forget that you'll have the visor that may need some taping as well. You can see I just tried to line it up the best as possible so that the color lines would match up. Obviously it's adjustable and it won't be 100% perfect, but try and get it as close as you can. All right, now we're back to painting, and this first blue coat will follow the same steps as all the others. Your first coat will just be a really light dusting. Give it 10 minutes. Give it another light to medium second coat. Give it another 10 minutes. Lay it on a little bit heavier on your third and fourth coats if you go that far. I'm just taking the helmet out of this little booth just so that when I spray the visor, I don't get overspray onto the helmet, and then just bringing it back in. So if you don't have a setup like this, you probably don't have to keep moving it in and out, but just make sure that there's good even coverage And again, don't worry if it doesn't look 100% perfect or if you get some splatter, because it's going to be a recurring theme that once this dries, you're going to be doing some wet sanding. So remember, what you'll do is let this dry 40 minutes to an hour or something, so that you can actually touch it, so that it's not fully cured. Then you'll remove the tape, then let it cure a full 24 hours, and then you'll get to wet sanding. So again, I'm just using 800 grit sandpaper, and all I want to do is sand out any imperfection that I have and kind of knock down that little ridge that the blue has left in relation to the gray. It's going to be a little bit raised, so just try and knock that down. So on to the decals here. So you can see I'm just trying to put on some decals, just kind of random where I want them. You can do whatever you want, follow whatever procedure you want, but just like in the other helmet, we're going to put them on, paint over them, and then use that plastic razor blade to scrape them off. So you can see that sometimes here, like because of the curve of the helmet where it's round, these decals don't want to like lay completely flat, so you might have to finagle them a little bit as you lay them down, so that they'll contour to the helmet. And just take your time, put them on. If you don't like them, take them off, try again, do whatever you want. And I will make note here too, like some of these decals, like that 615 I just put on the side, I mean, maybe not that one, but like you'll see some of these that are on the side or up right where that like this one right here, like this is going to be covered almost completely in the end with yellow. And so if I would have planned it out a little bit better, I wouldn't have put anything there, because all it's doing is creating more work for me and more opportunity for me to mess up on something. And then I'm just going to spray over it anyway. So, if you plan it out a little bit better, then same thing with this one. I mean, the sun of the Red Bull, and the Red Bull is going to just cover those completely. So, keep that in mind as you're laying your helmet out. Maybe put more thought into it than I did. But there is no wrong way to do it, and I don't hate how it turned out. So yeah, just finish on putting some decals, and then we'll pick it back up. Once we get all the decals on, the next step is just going to be more taping. We're going to tape off. We want to cover these with a metallic silver and with a metallic blue. So we're going to tape off one of the colors, just like we have before. Let's see here. It looks like I'm going to be taping the blue off first. So I just follow that line. So this time around, taping goes way easier because you already have that line to follow. But just tape it off, cover up all the blue, and we'll be spraying the silver. So same principle applies. Just a lot of repeating the same stuff over and over again. Honestly, at this point, if you've got this far, then you've basically got the idea of everything that needs to happen to finish off the whole helmet however you'd like. So let's watch this here, and I'll pick up again in just a minute. All right, so now that we got this pretty much taped up, sound like a broken record here, but back in the booth. And again, I'll leave all these colors down in the description below so that you can follow along. But first coat, it's just going to be a light coat, wait 10 minutes. Second coat, light to medium coat, wait 10 or so minutes. Third coat, medium to heavy coat. Fourth coat, same if you need it, medium to heavy coat. Let it dry for about, 45 minutes to an hour so that you can touch it without ruining the paint. Peel off the tape, let it cure for 24 hours, and then you can move on to doing the next step. So here you can see that I'm peeling off some of the decals on the silver side, which you don't really have to do yet. You just want to make sure that if you're going to do that, make sure you don't peel off a decal that crosses over to the blue side, because you obviously need to paint those still. So if you want to just, I know here I was impatient. I wanted to see what it looked like, to see how things turned out. I was excited about it. That's fine. But just make sure that you're not peeling up like that center popsicle one that would have taken it off the blue side and ruined the whole thing. So you could either just keep them on until you paint both sides, or just be careful to not peel off the ones that cross over on color. So again, when you're peeling off the tape, just try and keep that angle steep. Try and pull at a diagonal, and keep the way that you're pulling the tape sharp, or a steep angle on the tape, so that it cuts the bond between the two colors really easily. You can see though, all I try to do is gently peel up a corner of the decal, and then just try and peel it up, pull it off with your hand, rather than try and scrape it all off. So just peel up a little bit. I think that scraping against the helmet and the fresh paint as little as possible is always going to be good. So some of these little ones with the little lines get a little bit trickier, and take a little bit more time. In hindsight, I would have maybe used stuff with thicker lines so that it's easier to pull off. And this is where I realize I do not have any footage of me painting the second coat of blue. So you're just going to have to use your imagination and understand that we'll tape off the gray, we'll spray on the darker color of blue, we'll then untape the gray, pull off all of the decals, and that'll leave us at this point where we have no more decals, and we've got 2 tones of gray and 2 tones of blue. So you can see that the gray has a little metallic flake in it, and what we want to do next is put a sparkle effect on the blue side as well. So back to more of the same, right? Just going to tape off all of the gray sections now and prepare to spray sparkle effect, like a clear coat with a sparkle effect on top of just the blue only. So we'll watch through this really quick, and I'll pick back up when we're about ready to spray. All right, so back at the paint booth, we're going to put on this glitter effect. Like I said, it's just a clear coat with some glitter in it. And on this particular paint, we're only going to do 1 coat. And my recommendation would be to go light and evaluate how much flake you want on the helmet, and then see if you need to spray a little bit more. At this point, I remember that I thought I just ruined everything that I did, because the way this looked before it had dried was just over the top sparkly, and I thought, man, what have I done? This visor is ruined. You can tell I'm just sitting there looking at it. But in the end, when it dried, it actually calmed down a little bit and looks really good. So if you're going to follow these exact steps with these exact products, maybe just keep in mind that when you spray that on before it dries, while it's still really wet, it is going to look more sparkly than the finished product. So you can see here, I'll just leave it so you can see about how much of the sparkle effect or the glitter effect that I put on. and we'll pick up for the next step after that. All right, at this point, now that you've put on as much of the glitter effect as you'd like, our next step is going to be to give it, 45 minutes or so to cure just a little bit so that you can touch it, peel off the masking, then give it a full 24 hours to fully cure. And then the next day, what you want to do is just come back. We're going to put on a nice coat of clear coat or varnish. What we want to try to accomplish with this is just to seal in everything that we've done. So you're going to go through the exact same steps, only luckily this time you don't have to tape anything off. Just give it a coat, let it rest for 10 minutes or so, give it another coat, rest for 10 minutes or so, and you want to do this, 3 or 4 coats of this clear coat. And what that's going to do is give us a nice base to work off of again, so that as we're working on this helmet and we're doing more wet sanding here in the future, we're not going to cut down into the blue or the gray or ruin any of the project that we've done so far. So give it a nice clear coat, let it rest for 24 hours to cure up, and then the next step will be, you guessed it, more wet sanding. At this point, I don't think I need to give any explanation as to what we're doing here. We're going to just wet sand with 800 grit wet sandpaper. We want to just make sure that we rough up the whole surface of the helmet so that we got it, like I said before, a nice base that'll give some grab to all of the colors that we're going to put on. What this also does too is, although paint isn't a filler, every time that you paint over one of those decals, it does leave a little ridge. So every time you do a color or a decal or something, you do have like a little ridge that this clear coat will sort of fill in and smooth out, and then you can kind of sand it down and get a smoother, better finish. And so as you go through and do all your colors and wet sand the helmet after each color or as often as you want, just know that that's the purpose, is to kind of knock down those harsh edges. And then on the very last step, when we do our very last shot of clear coat, it will be, glossy smooth. Something, when we get to the end, you'll see I probably could have done better with. But now that we're done wet sanding and I've got the helmet clean and completely dry, we're going to start doing some of the cool stuff now and actually masking up the helmet for some of the decals with the red, white, yellow colors. So what I have going on here is I want to just I have a decal with a name that's going to go right across the top there, and I just want to find the center point of the helmet, which we already have. I measured the length of the decal, and now I'm going to mark on either side of the helmet where the left and the right side need to land in order to keep that wording centered right in the helmet. So I'll just let this play through here. This little flexible ruler, I think I got it at the dollar store. Works really well because you can fold it up against the helmet, and it's like a soft rubber plastic, so it's not going to scratch or ruin the paint job at all. But as you start to do these decals, you're going to want to use a lot of measurements and create some markers like I'm doing with those green tape. And the more the better, because it's actually pretty hard to get these to lay down flat on this curved surface and stay centered right to left, top to bottom. So take your time and be gentle with it. And as you're working on it, if it doesn't sit right, try and peel it back. And I would say, if you want to do a really good job, maybe even have 1 or 2 extra decals just in case you totally botch one, you can just do another one. So, You just watch here. I'm going to pull out the center because the next color we're going to do is white. So everything that has a white background on the helmet now, I'm going to place the decals for that, and then we'll tape off everything but the spots that we want to paint white and paint those white. So we'll work through this, and I'm going to have to apologize again. For some reason, I don't have any footage of about half of these first decals. So you can see I'll put this one on the front, this one on the back, and I'll prepare to put one on the side, and then I run out of footage. I don't know if my camera died or if I just didn't record, so I apologize. But, you know, you get the idea, and I don't think that watching me put these decals on is going to hinder your ability to complete the project yourself, especially since we'll be doing more decals several times after this. So like I said before, just take your time, work through it, make sure that they're all centered and equal on each side, and then we'll get to painting white. So again, just in case you forgot, make sure that as soon as you're ready to paint, that you're cleaning down your surface that you're going to paint with some wax and grease remover or something, so that the paint doesn't have any oils or grease that is going to prohibit it from adhering to the helmet. And we're going to do just more of the same, right? Light coat on your first coat, let it sit. Light to medium on your second coat, let it sit 10, 15 minutes or whatever. Medium to heavy coat on your third and your fourth coat. But I do want to bring some attention to one thing right here where I messed up. So let's go back really quick. So right here you can see I failed to mask off the bottom part of this decal. So when I sprayed on the white paint, I sprayed it where it was supposed to go, and below that decal there's about a 1 centimeter strip that was just uncovered. So white paint went right there as well. I didn't realize this until I was unmasking it, and luckily, you know, we put that clear coat on, and I was able to carefully sand off almost all of the white paint that I put on without going, you know, past the clear coat and back into the gray and the blue. So that's one good reason to why that clear coat might save you, is if you make a mistake like that. But just, you know, double check all of your work to make sure that you've got this stuff masked off exactly how you want it, and that there's nothing poking through or something that's going to be missed, because it's always a bummer to peel that masking tape off and then realize that you screwed up somewhere. So here I do have some footage of what I did to, you can see that white line just right underneath the lettering. Basically what I wanted to do is just make sure I didn't sand accidentally anywhere that I didn't want sanded. So I'm going to tape off this area, and I'm going to wet sand as lightly as I can, just that little area where the white paint came through. Like I said, it ended up coming out all right. There was still a tiny bit there. I didn't go too aggressive. It's a spot that's going to go largely unnoticed in the end. But as I was watching through this again, I did want to make note, when you're painting this white as well, because the white is going on top of darker colors, you might need to put 4 or 5 coats if you're doing them lighter, just to make sure that the blue and the gray don't bleed through and are visible through the white. In the end, if they were, it wouldn't be the end of the world, because, you know, as you've probably already could guess, we're going to paint over top of most of the white anyways. But just, you know, something to be aware of as you're painting the white. I think that's typically why you'd want white colors first, and then you want to paint darker colors on top of white, because painting white over dark colors doesn't always yield the best result. So I'll just hurry and finish sanding this here, and then at the end here you'll be able to see it actually did turn out pretty good. So you can see here that most of the white is gone. There were a couple just little spots that you're probably are hard to pick up on the camera. Overall, I was pleased with the result, and that clear coat, having that clear coat underneath, man, it really saved me on this one. So yeah, don't skip that clear coat step. It will allow you to maybe fix some of these mistakes if you make some along the way. All right, so let's just keep going. Now what we need to do is do an outline so that we can paint the red color. And basically I just did up the same decals. Now I can take out the centers of the decals, which will leave the centers open so we can do red. Just pull those out, and then I like to use this yellow tape because you can see through it. That allows you to find, you want to line those up, just right at the very edge of the white so that it has just that little white outline. And a tip here would be to just press these on real gentle at first until they're exactly where you want them to be. And then you can really press them down, because it'll allow you to kind of pull it back and retry 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 times. And then, as always, you guys are probably professionals at this point. Just pull that off at a sharp angle, go slow. You can tell this is obviously sped up, but go slow, take your time. If it feels like you're starting to peel up a decal, just stop and make sure it gets pressed back down. And again, it doesn't have to be completely perfect unless you want it to be, but we're going to be taping around the outside of this entire decal anyways. So just make sure that it's as close to the edges as you can get it. And then make sure, again, as you just saw, I missed taping the bottom portion of that one right above the visor or the eye place. So just make sure when you're taping off around the outside of these that you just do a thorough job. So it's all just more of the same. So we'll just kind of speed through this, but press it on, make sure it's nice and snug onto the helmet, and then gently peel it off and make sure you don't take any of the decals with you that you don't want to be gone. So this bowl one was a little bit tricky, and again, there's no real tip to getting it done other than just take your time and be real gentle with it when you're pressing it on, so that you can just make sure that it's exactly in the right spot that you want. So just line it up just like the same on the other ones. I don't have footage of me doing all of these decals, but do the exact same thing to the other side and anywhere else that you've got some sort of stencil like this that you need to fill in with a color. Once it's all taped up, all the spots that you don't want to be red, tape them up. We're going to just go back to painting, and obviously the drill here as well. Light coats. Your first coat should be light. Your second and third should be a little bit heavier. I think I went a little bit too heavy on the second coat on this one. It came out okay in the end, but a little bit of a risk, I guess, on my part. So just make sure that you're putting in the light coats, letting it sit just like always, giving it 10 minutes or so, putting on a second and a third coat, and then letting it sit again, 45 minutes or so, or to an hour. Then you can unpeel it, peel off the tape, peel off the decals, and let it sit for a full day before you do the next coat. So we'll speed through this, and then I'll pick up after I've let it sat for a full day and I've already peeled off all of the decals and the tape, and then we're going to start masking again to spray the yellow color. Now we're back, getting ready to mask up the yellow. Don't forget to, mask off your visor and paint that if you have some of it going up onto the visor. This was pretty difficult, and you'll see that I left. You might ask, why did you leave? Why did you open this up so that there's a big hole? If you're just going to have to tape that off, you obviously don't want that portion of the bowl to be yellow, but I tried a decal that was solid, and I couldn't get it to line up, or I didn't know because I can't see through the decal where it was lining up in relation to the bowl and the white outline that needed to happen. So I opted to just go for a thin outline like this, and then I'm going to tape up that center portion with just some more painter's tape. But this way I know that line is going in the right spot and will be the right thickness. It won't be accidentally scooted over to the right or to the left too far, making it look silly. So this was probably the most difficult one, but just take your time with it and try it again until you're happy. And then another tip would be, when I was doing this sun, I actually laid that sticker. You can't really tell on the top part, but I laid it slightly on the outside of the white circle. Again, because I didn't want to accidentally spray the yellow and then peel that off and see that there was a little white outline peeking through. You can see it much better on that bottom half, how I kind of just brought it down just a little bit so that when I spray the yellow, it's going to completely cover that white and it won't be showing through. So I forgot a little spot here, that there's a little yellow spot right there in between the legs and the chin of the bull. And rather than print off a decal for that, I just made a little triangle with my tape. And then I'm going to go through now and just tape everything up. So anything that you need to paint yellow, you might be doing a sun on the visor or something like that, you'd follow the same process and just tape it up and get ready to paint. All right, now we're ready to paint the yellow, and you know the drill. 3 to 4 coats. First 2 are going to be lighter. You can probably go a little bit heavier on the second, third, fourth, however many you feel it needs to cover up well. Let it dry about 10 to 15 minutes in between each coat, and then a full hour or so before you peel off the decals, and then a full day before you sand or put on the next color or whatever the next step is. So we'll just watch that. After we do the yellow and I unmask everything, I'm going to move on to the very last step right here, which is just spray the entire helmet down with a clear coat, a varnish clear coat, and we're going to put this on fairly thick. And the best instruction would be here is to spray it on, let it, 2-3 coats, however many. I did an entire can on this, so just I put it on as much as I could to make sure that it was well covered. And then if you're unhappy with the texture, if there is any texture on it, or if you need to, then you can always wet sand it back down and do another one. And you might even do 2 or 3 full coats on this with the varnish just to make sure that it makes it more durable and more resistant to the sun, and just overall gives you a better finish and look. Once it's done, it'll look super smooth and super glossy. So that is it for painting. Like I said, you know the drill. Just put this on as much as you can, 3 or 4 really nice coats, and then let that dry a full 24 hours. Once it's fully dried and cured, unmask everything completely and reassemble the helmet. So this is, now that we've sprayed this all, this is now the final product, and you can take a look and see for yourself how I did. If you notice anything that I did wrong or could improve on, then obviously take that, use it for yourself, and do a better job for yourself. But hopefully this video was educational and showed you, at the very least, that somebody with no painting experience, as long as you're patient and take your time, you can have some super cool results. Thanks for watching, everyone.